When we consider nature spirits in an occult or magical context, they can appear to be a clearly defined category of beings. In most books on witchcraft or spirit work, they might be reduced to a chapter or even a paragraph. So, what are we talking about when we refer to nature spirits? Are we talking about elementals, a la Paracelsus or Madame Blavatsky, or the pixies and sprites of Victorian nurseries? Are we referring to a spiritual presence in thunder or a gust of wind? Do we imagine the hermetic sympathies that we can draw from plants and trees, or conspicuous animals arriving as omens, or the vibes in an ancient ruin or battlefield? Are nature spirits the spirits of humans buried in nature? And what happens to these spirits when their valley or coast or hillside becomes a city? It would appear that the deeper we look into this category of spirits, a clear definition isn't constellated. Instead, a plurality or ecology begins to emerge. Thankfully, Elyse Wells has freed the spirits of the land from the confines of these reduced delineations and given them the space of a full book to be explored with the nuance and depth they deserve. What role does the egregore of a town or city play in our spiritual engagement with the land? And how do we reach beyond it? Can the animating forces of a bioregion call on animal emissaries to deliver messages? Where do land spirits end and gods begin? Tune in to find out. Elyse Wells, welcome to Radical L Fam. It is awesome to have you here.
I am honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been a fan of your podcast for a while. You have, I think, 3 podcasts?
Yeah, I have one that's on hiatus,
Okay.
but I have 2, although we have 9 episodes recorded. We're just looking for an editor. Um,
Nice.
but yeah, I have one that is like a paranormal meets the mystical, because the paranormal world is unfortunately, can be quite mundane and Christianized and not
Mm-hmm.
a wonderful place to be as a magical practitioner. So we're trying to make that, trying to change that. And then I have the Magic Kitchen podcast, which introduces people to witchcraft and deeper occult conversations. We like to have on guests from backgrounds that are all kinds of crazy. And then Seeking Numina, the Sacred Places podcast, which is my show on my own, really charting Numina, powerful places in the world, and namely Greece. And lately the UK. I have a lot of friends in the UK who do deep dives at certain places that I like to dive into. Like I had Brett Hollyhead on to speak about Sabrina and the River Severn, and really niche deep dives on what is this one sacred place and everything about it, which is really fun.
Oh yeah, those are all my favorite things. That's great. Yeah, I love your shows. And today we're kind of largely focusing on your new book, Sacred Wild, which is really exciting, having followed your shows to see you kind of diving into the writing world, which is really cool. But maybe just to kick things off for the people that are newer to you, just a little bit of an intro. I mean, that was a great breakdown of your podcasts, but like a little bit more about your practice, what got you into magic, that sort of thing.
So I am one of those extremely lucky people, and I'm grateful for this every day, that I was practicing as a kid way before I knew I was practicing. So I've had my spirit guide with me since I literally as long as I can remember. But I thought she was my imaginary friend that I created.
Hmm.
And as I was getting older, I was like maybe 11. I remember it was the 6th grade. And I was like, my friends don't have imaginary friends anymore. You need to get out of here. I'm not supposed to have an imaginary friend anymore.
Hmm.
And so she over time kind of guided me. Actually, there was a book series called the Seer series by Llewellyn. It's the only YA they've ever published. It was
Weird.
like 25 years ago. Um, Called the Seer series. Fantastic. Sabine and her spirit guide in high school, going about life. And that helped. She guided me in this book series in the library and like my spirit guide, and it helped me understand what was going on. So, and I grew up actually mostly in Amish country. I'm a native Greek priestess as well. So I'm Greek and Egyptian, actually, which is a whole complicated it's a very oppressed type of person to be Greek Egyptian in Greece and Egypt. It's much more oppressed in Egypt than Greece. So my dad, and that's on my dad's side. So we would spend a good bit of our year in Greece, but we were educated, hence the accent, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So Amish people. So we didn't have cable because it didn't exist where we lived. We didn't have electric very often sometimes. Like if we had a storm, it would go out for 2 weeks. Um, and my neighbors were all Amish. My babysitters were Amish. My friends I had sleepovers with were Amish. So
Wow.
I really like spent time with land spirits and just it wasn't even about taking it for granted. That was just my normal. And as I got older, we actually lived in the Middle East for a time growing up in high school. So, and that was a huge shock. I mean, for those familiar with like the UAE and the Gulf, it's like a hugely industrial, there's not really land to connect with. And even the water that you could potentially go swimming in, like the beaches in the Middle East, they're man made. Like they actually like dredge up coral and like they don't take care of the environment. And so it was my first time experiencing, because obviously Greece is a very like lush and naturally preserved place. So between Amish country and Greece, these main places I'd ever been, once I was 14 and we were in the Middle East, for the first time I knew what it was like to feel the absence of spirit. Because quite honestly, I've been back as an adult and a deeper practitioner since. Those land spirits have just abandoned the land. They said, "You guys deserve whatever happens to you. Peace, peace out."
Hmm.
And it's spooky. I mean, it's a spooky land. The Middle East, parts of the Gulf. Yeah, not a great vibe. So having that absence showed me the presence back home. And we would go
Mm.
home to the US and Greece for, we'd go to Greece for spring break and then go to US for summer. And so I was always able to dip my toes and I still live that way. I still split my year between I was in Greece full time for 5 years, but this past year I've started splitting my year a little more for conferences and opportunities in the US. Um, so and I get to have that best of both worlds. So that was when I started realizing, like, okay, I guess what I do is something unique. It's something intentional more than I thought it was. And so throughout high school, I started practicing magic more intentionally. Solitary Witch by Silver Ravenwolf, whatever you could get your hands on back in those days. Scott Cunningham, of course, Christopher Penczak, Temple of Witchcraft books. And then, but I was, of course, solitary. You're in high school. You don't tell your parents what you're doing. This was mostly before internet too. Like Witch Fox was around, but not like Instagram
Real
influencers and
internet.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then when I went to college, I wanted to study with somebody, but I didn't want to go hunting. I wanted it to be organic and natural who I found. And sure enough, I actually worked at the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair as an actor and singer. I work a lot with Dionysios now, and I think that's pretty
Mm.
clear now looking back. Like I was actually a theater teacher for 5 years um, before this was my full time gig. So anyway, one of my good friends at the Ren Fair found this great coven, and so that's how I studied, and so I'm an initiate and high priestess in the eclectic fairy tradition. So we come down from Anderson Fairy, but we added eclectic because we actually do a lot less of the cerebral side of
Hmm.
Anderson Fairy. For those familiar,
Mm-hmm.
they're much more focused on the three selves and this inner work, and we
Mm-hmm.
actually work with fairies quite a lot. So we
Hmm.
spell it Faery, and
Yeah.
yeah, so we still have a lot of those elements in our ritual, but um, a lot less gendered because land spirits
Mm.
are agender. And so that's much more resonant with what I do and how I teach. And it's definitely kind of the way the tradition has gone, which is exciting.
Hell
And then
yeah.
on top of that, I'm
Yeah.
a native Greek priestess. So I when I'm in Greece, I'm working with oracle sites to understand what the oracles did. What did these ancient priestesses do? My family's from Arcadia. So Pan, Dionysios, the Maenads, like the Melisai, like these were my people. And so I go to these places and I use my frame drum and I just feel what they have to share. And so I have a lot of personal gnosis practices that kind of weave into all of the more grounded. And then I did my master's degree in the history of the modern history of witchcraft. So I try to always look at it as like a braid, three strands of
Mm-hmm.
like academic, personal gnosis and experience and, tradition.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's great. A few threads I just wanted to pull on. That's a fascinating bio. First, you talk about your imaginary friend and you realizing they're actually a spirit guide. I love that. It sounds like your experience of this being was very visceral,
Yeah.
very in your face, not mind's eye kind of stuff. Obviously, certain people might experience. Was there a point where that faded and you had to bring it back, or was it just kind of like you were ignoring it as best as you could until you accepted it?
That's a great question. So in that moment in 6th grade, like she led me to the
Yeah.
books pretty much that day, and I didn't interrupt contact with her. I only had an interruption of contact with her for the first time when I went to college in the US. I went to a very conservative school. I chose it. It was a state school in PA. I literally don't want to name it because I don't want anyone to ever go there. It was so bad. Like, we had protesters. This tells the time. It was a long time ago. We had protesters against gay marriage. We had
Mhm.
anytime we wanted to do anything about like take back the night or anything like that, we weren't allowed to. Like, that's how conservative this place was. You would be walking to class and there'd be pastors handing out Bibles, but it was a state school. And I went there because I got a free ride. And I could
Mm.
have gone to Gettysburg, but I would have been like 180,000 in debt.
Yeah.
So I made the right choice, but it was an awful it was an awful place to go to school.
My
Um
God.
so I tried to make it work. Like, I was like, I wasn't going to become a conservative asshole, but I was like, let me go under the radar a little bit. And so my spiritual practice, I put everything to a halt. I didn't have an altar for the first time in 5 years at that point. And it was the only time, the first time, there was another time that my spirit guide pulled away, and it was horrible. So I
Mm.
pulled her back in about 6 to 8 months into that experience. And I just told my super vanilla roommate, um, I was like, look, this is my altar. I'm a witch. I need to do this thing. And of course, she was like a little weird about it, but not so much because she actually agreed to room with me another year after that. Um,
Yeah.
and then the other time she pulled away was same thing. I graduated college and was like, okay, I'm going to be a full time teacher. I don't have time. This is in quotation marks. I don't have time to work with spirituality because I need to focus on my career. Meanwhile, obviously, I know now you're supposed to use your spirituality to support you and expand your bandwidth and, increase capacity and raise your energy, all those things. I just was too narrow minded, and that was also horrific. But I will say this too. She became less as I got older. I would say by like seventh, eighth, ninth grade, it became a third eye experience. It was less
Mm.
literally she's in
Mhm.
the room with me, except for certain special times. So that first year of teaching, I was getting back in touch with my spiritual practices. And the easiest way that felt like at the time was first to get in touch with, I was living in Baltimore, first to get in touch with the land spirits there, which was kind of ambitious because cities can be a bit harder to connect to. But we did have this lovely old oak tree, and I was on the second floor on my balcony. And so I got this little like candle stand, and I made it an altar to the Fae of Baltimore, and I put it out there, and I would leave them offerings. And one day I'd left an offering, and I said, like, I need a sign that someone's even getting these. And like I said, one tree, a maple, those little pinwheels, maple
Mhm.
seed falls and lands right on my little candle thing. It's like a 2.5 inch diameter. And I was like, okay. And then I just got I'm getting chills remembering this. I got so
Uh,
sad that my spirit guide was gone that I put my
huh.
hand out and I said, like, please come back. And that was the first time in, like, at that point, 7 or 8 years that I had seen her like I used to see her as a little girl. And she took
Wow.
my
That's
hand.
crazy.
And so since then, there's been like my family went through a really bad, like my parents went through a bad health scare last year. That was another time she showed up in the hospital room with like
Mm.
physical form. But most of the time it's very third eye, like what people expect.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like she did when I was a little kid, she'll show up and do silly things like, like this really bad thing is happening or this something that triggers some of my trauma happens. And she'll like drop and do a one-handed push-up and just like be silly and like just be like, it's not that serious. It's fine. Don't worry. Things like
Interesting.
that.
Huh.
Yeah, really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. That's intense. That's super cool. Another thing you brought up that I just wanted to hear a little bit more about was uh, you were saying that Greek, Egyptian people are oppressed in some way. I've never heard anything about that. I'm curious,
That is by
the Cliff
design.
Notes version. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So Egypt is colonized by Islam. Now, that is not a popular
Ah,
opinion, but it
huh.
is the facts. I mean, think
Interesting.
about what we have in Egypt. The Egyptian people were, independent, 100% independent. They were powerful on their own right. And then Islam began, the Ottoman Empire began expanding and touching into that. And now that has continued and persisted to the point where the only Egyptians left who are related to the ancient Egyptians are the Coptic Christians.
Hmm.
And that's my family's lineage. And we are relegated in Egypt to living on landfills, to living in, you know, like if you want to live in Cairo where there's more opportunity, you have to live in the landfill if you're Christian. Maybe you'll find someone who would rent to you, or maybe your family has enough money that you could pool it and buy something. Coptics also have a kind of uncomfortable, not my family, but the ones who stay in Egypt, they have a kind of uncomfortable incest culture that's totally illegal because they're trying to keep their money safe and because
Uh,
there's so few of them. So a lot of people
huh.
end up marrying their first and second cousins. Um, 3 generations ago, my dad's family were in Greece, and so they kind of stayed there. So I fortunately do not have that problem in my direct lineage, but it is a thing in Egypt for that reason because they're so small and trying to keep what they have. My dad's generation, so not mine, but my dad's and back, you actually would get a cross tattooed on you because it was so legal to discriminate against Coptics. You'd go to shake someone's hand, check what they were, and then you could just walk away if you were prejudiced. So yeah, so Greece and Egypt, of course, have always had a deep running connection. They're really one nation. Greeks can be kind of prickly about foreigners. Not actually. They're very like Xenia. They're very welcoming. But sometimes they'll have opinions about other people, or they'll be like, "Oh, all Germans are like this," whatever. But when it comes to Egyptians, I've never heard a Greek person treat them as other at all,
Huh.
in any way.
Interesting.
And that's because the Coptics and the Orthodox have always viewed each other as sisters and connected. And so, at different periods of Egypt's history, even in the past, even in my own lifetime, there's been times where Egypt's been unsafe. And so the Coptic will go to Greece for refuge. And so being Greek Egyptian, it's almost impossible to separate it. It's kind of its own identity.
Hmm.
Like I don't identify as Greek American because my dad is Greek. Like he's from Greece.
Mm,
And so I am Greek
hmm.
and I'm American. Like it's
Yeah.
totally separate. Whereas Greek Americans
Yeah.
tend to be people who came and naturalized generations prior. Um,
Hmm.
and it's like Italian Americans. They have their own culture that's super separate from Italy. Whereas
Yeah.
I don't know the Greek American culture. It's totally separate from me because I just know Greek culture. So yeah, so in Greece, they've always offered refuge to the Coptics. It's very sad too. Like if I was in Egypt doing ritual as an Egyptian, I could be executed for it. But if you are
Jesus.
because witchcraft's illegal there. But if you are a Westerner and you're there on a tour, they don't want to get bad press. So they're not going to do anything to you. So it's really sad. So like when we think of things like cultural appropriation, I'm never ever going to say the Egyptian gods are closed. Like it's no, that's not at all what I'm saying. But it is interesting to think that like there is probably no native Egyptians teaching, because they would be killed. And it's the same with Greece. You will not be killed. But the Orthodox Church, of course, it's a church. It condemns witchcraft. But there is separation of church and state insofar as Greece is part of the EU. So they would never like come for you.
Mm,
But they do not like what I do. They
huh.
watch me a little closely. And if I make a post about something, a place that I've done ritual and I name the place, suddenly within a month, there are fences and it's impassable. And I didn't wanna have, like, a big head to believe that that was what was going on, but after the 4th time, I was like, that's definitely what's going on. Because 'Cause I'm also the Greek correspondent for the Wild Hunt, so there's no way
Mm,
that no one knows,
mhm.
And in Greece, like, this sounds crazy to say, but I am the only native Greek priestess teaching the Earth Temple arts in English. I'm the only one. And I know 2 other women who speak English and know a bit about this stuff, but they will never teach people because they're so the target on their back. So I use my privilege of having one foot in the West to do what I can do because I also, I have my other foot there. So it's important work, and that's why I kinda whistleblow on this topic because and Greeks get mad at me about it. Like, even my friends who are practicing witches, they're like, "Don't say that, it makes Greece sound bad." And I'm like,
Yeah.
look, it's not about making Greece sound bad, it's about making Greece change for the better.
Yeah. Man, that's fascinating. Holy shit. Honestly, did
Yeah, it's
not know
crazy,
most of
right?
that.
No one does, unless they read my articles in the Wild Hunt. I mean, literally, I'm like the whistleblower for Greece, and I have some people love me there, some people hate me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, well, I appreciate you doing it and speaking out about it. It is valuable. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I loved your new book, Sacred Wild.
Thank
Really
you.
well done. I think the topic of land spirits in broad terms, you really see it come up every once in a while as a chapter in somebody else's book that's more about a wider magical idea or approach. But I think something you really do well in the book is show how broad of a topic it is and how nuanced it is. Maybe just for folks who are listening and haven't read it yet, just a quick synopsis of what the book is about, and then also maybe what inspired you to write it.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the book. It is a
Yeah,
book that I could have sworn someone else had already written. Like,
yeah,
as this book idea, so the idea came to me, like I said, these are things I've just done by nature. It's in my nature to work with nature. I'm a Taurus. I'm a caricature of a Taurus. Like,
me
truly, it's
too.
like comical. Um, like, from the food love to the earth love.
Hmm.
I'm wearing all brown. Like, it's just always like this for me. And when I got this idea for the book, I was actually at my parents' place in Greece, and they my dad is very spirit led. He works with Mother Mary and Saint George as his primary. I would call them like deities, but he calls them saints,
Hmm.
And they guided him to retire up near Delphi.
Hmm.
So I was driving up to their place and I got there early. I was with my brother. We got there early and we get out of the car and the sun is setting. And as we step out of the car, this fox comes out of the tree line. And this is a tree line of Pevka, of pine trees. And these are a protected pine tree because the Athena owls live in them. So it's like a
Mm.
forest of wisdom. And
Hmm.
this fox comes out of it and makes dead eye contact with me. Side note, there is no rabies in Greece, so there was no fear involved. Like, I knew it was the spirit message. And he comes about maybe 5 or 6 feet away from me and stares me down. And I hear in my head, prepare for a message. And I'm like, okay. And I nod to this fox, like I send him, gratitude. And it just looks at me and nods back, like literally a freaking like comical, like it just puts its head down a little bit and then turns and gently walks back into the forest. So that night, after I shower, I go outside on the balcony and I'm brushing my hair. The sun is like mostly set because the sun sets in Greece at certain times of the year take hours. They can take 2 hours to happen. So all of this happened during sunset. So when we talk about sunset and twilight as a liminal time, in certain parts of the world, that liminal time is quite long. So
Hmm.
that's something to think about for
Yeah.
listeners and viewers. Like, it's liminal time is when we talk about time not being linear, like this is kind of a great
Mm.
example of it. So I go out on the balcony and I brush my hair. And hair is a big part of my practice. It's the most sacred part of us in a way because it's so long. It's been with us so long. Even if you cut your hair often, those little guys can still take a year or two to get down there. So it's special. And for me, I haven't cut my hair. I cut my hair ceremonially twice a year with my aunt. Um, but I don't usually cut it. And when I do, that hair becomes part of ritual. And so anyway, so I'm brushing my hair and I have a little hair on the brush and I decide to offer it to this tree line. And as it floats into the trees, I get this download for Sacred Wild. I get it so
Hmm.
clearly. I have to run inside and bring my laptop out, and I'm balancing it on the balcony banister. I'm like, please don't drop this. Like, and I got all 12 chapters. Like, it was crazy how clear this thing came out. And then I got a few titles of next books. So stay tuned. They're coming. They're being written and being published soon, hopefully.
Nice.
Um, and it was just rapid fire. And so I understood this as like, okay, this is my next thing to do. So land spirits, and as I was writing the book, I was like looking for books to cite because these terms were so
Mm.
clear to me of what they meant. But I guess they were mine. Like, so far, so that seems to be the case. So I kind of
Yeah.
break down the nuance of what a land spirit is. The land spirits themselves are like the current of energy that is the earth. It's primordial, it's eternal, it cannot
Hmm.
die. It's never been human. That's the important thing.
Yeah.
Deities understand humans. Sometimes they walk among us.
Hmm.
Spirit guides, I believe all spirit guides have to have lived as a human because otherwise, how could they help us do it?
Hmm.
Ancestors, of course, are humans when we think of the traditional definition of ancestors. Land spirits, fae, these have never been human. They're different. And so that's a different connection. It's kind of like a radio station that's a little harder to tune to, but
Hmm.
it's worth the work, I think. And that's what the book does. It starts you with like, I think it scaffolds you. So the first exercise is
Hmm.
literally take a cup of coffee outside in the morning.
Hmm.
Everyone can do it. But by the end, you start to understand how deep these practices can go, how they layer onto each other, and then you're off to the races. So these land spirits can be the hardest to feel, but they're the current at the bottom. And then up from that, you have your guardians. So that's your oldest tree on your land or in your
Hmm.
neighborhood. That's the little creek trickling by. Maybe it's not even a creek, maybe it's just the gutter, but you know that the way that water flows, it flows from this, like it's the flow of nature around you. It might not be a tree, it might be a bush, it might be a shrub. Maybe it's your pokeberry that is so persistent every year coming back at your front gate. So these are our guardians. Then we have our elders, and that's your rivers, your mountains, these in a way iconic, preeminent forces of nature that kind of dictate a larger AOE, a larger area of effect than, say, that tree in your yard would have. Um, and then within those layers too is the emissaries. So the emissaries is what I call the critters, the animals that can come to you. And the emissaries are what the land spirits will communicate to you with first, usually, because they're much more visible. So a squirrel, a fox, a bird, type of bird. Insects, please, please, people, do not discount insects. They're our most important things alive on this planet. We need them more than we need anything else. Even the mammals we love to death, like we will all survive without pandas. We will not survive without bees.
Sure.
Insects are everything, everything. So listen to them and love them, and please don't squish them. Take them outside. So looking for your insects, all these things. These are our emissaries. Land spirits love to communicate to us through them. And then there's elementals, and elementals are separate
Mhm.
to me because they are transient. That's the difference. Um, this past weekend, actually, at Sacred Space Conference, Ivo Dominguez Jr. was giving a talk, and he described elementals versus spirits of the elements as different. He
Huh.
was saying that when we're at our altars, for those who practice a more traditional craft where you call in directions or you call in elements, he
Mhm.
was describing that to him, those are different than wind spirits. Like calling in air is different than calling in wind spirits to him, because he was saying that the air itself is like an ethereal concept. It's almost like a deity, or uh, it's a cosmic force to talk
Huh.
about air
Mhm.
as a new
It's
beginnings,
like
as wisdom,
archetypal.
as it's archetypal. Yes,
Mm.
exactly. Whereas the wind spirits are the air incarnate. And those are
Huh.
more what I'm talking about when I talk about elementals. So the wind spirits, um, you know, so one of my good friends, she's actually with me right now. We got snowed in after Sacred Space Conference as of recording this. Um, she lives up in upstate New York. So if a storm is coming from the north to the south, she'll send love to me through that wind.
Mm.
If it's coming
Huh.
south to north, I can send it to her. So
Huh.
wind spirits are my favorite elementals to work with, but of course rain is water spirits. They're all present. Um so it's they're a little different too, but they're in this book too, because I think you can't really disseminate it, because again, your land is going to make sure it lets you know it hears you, and it's going to let you know what it wants you to hear from it. So that'll often be speaking through wind. That's why I always, I know a lot of people like to use north as the first direction. But that's why I resonate with east as the first direction, because the wind is the first spirit of place that you can really always, it's real. Like you can't argue with yourself about it.
I really appreciate, in particular, the way you describe animal spirits there. I feel like often when people talk about animal spirits, they're not seeing them as being connected to a wider spirit of land, almost like they're more individualistic. But
Hmm.
my own personal experience does really match on to what you were describing, where you're describing them as like the familiars or the fetch of the land in a certain sense. Yeah,
Ooh,
I
I like that.
really,
The
really like
fetch.
that. Yeah. It just, I don't know, it reshapes the perspective when you're interacting with them. Not that you shouldn't accept their individuality, but still, it's just to see it as a part of a bigger pattern that you're connecting to. I identify with that a lot for sure, which is cool.
Well, it's the multitudes we all should seek to contain. Like I think that's what I love about a magical practice or a spiritual practice is it is meant to be varied. And yes, there's concerns of appropriation, and eclecticism can get muddied and then it loses meaning. But like for me, like it can feel very disparate to, okay, I help with land spirits. All right. I also am Greek. I'm Egyptian. And then I do this over here in the UK sometimes. But it is all the same thing because it's all planet Earth. I'm doing the same thing everywhere. I'm just able to disseminate, of course, Greece feels different than North America, things like that. Um, and I think that's how we all should be. We should appreciate the individual within, but we also can find the common ground of, okay, this person is a practicing, witch, and she understands all these things. And so she's coming from that wisdom as much as she's also coming from her own heart. And that's how these
Oh, wow.
emissaries function with the land as well.
Yeah, that's great. Um, I also like you bringing up wind just now, in general, because you have a whole chapter on weather magic, which, as somebody who has studied various folk magic traditions, often the weather magic I encounter feels a lot like you are trying to affect the weather. You were trying to do something to change the weather. And yeah, I think that's something that certain people do. But I like that your emphasis was more about working magic with the weather. It's like a totally different perspective, I feel like. So I don't know if you just want to go a little deeper into like how you see weather magic.
Yeah. Reciprocity is at the core of this practice. And so, like, if you live in the Middle East, if you live in the GCC, um, if you're in the Arab Gulf and you want to manifest a snowstorm, it is not going to happen. You're only going to be draining
Mm-hmm.
your energy to do it. But if you know a storm is coming, but you just need an extra 3 hours out there, like that happened to me. So when we moved to the US, we bought a bit of a fixer upper because of its location. Of course, I chose like a spiritual place. So I live at the very bottom of the Susquehanna River, who is the oldest continuously flowing river in the entire world. She was flowing on Pangea. And this is where she ends and becomes brackish water with the Chesapeake Bay, which was formed by the meteor that we think was the one that maybe, you know, killed the dinosaurs, but essentially started our version of air that we can breathe. So when I think of that, I mean, this place drew me here over the past 10 years since college, or well, longer. But in college is when it started up north of here. And she's brought me gradually further south to here. And so I knew that when I was called back to the US, this would probably be where we'd be. And so, long story short, we were doing a lot of renovations to this house, and I needed to finish this paint project. And I saw the storms coming. So I talked to the land. I said, I need 2 hours, and then you can rain. We get to like 1 hour and 59 minutes, and I finish packing up, close the shed door, and it starts. So then I leave an offering of thanks because I really appreciated that. I needed to finish that painting. So that's the kind of weather magic I recommend with people is co-creation, is build relationships and understand, it's not about control. We should never, in a healthy spiritual practice, I don't think we should ever seek to control spirits. It has to be reciprocal. Um, Now, I will say, when I was a school teacher, I left that profession 7 years ago now. Um, but the top 3 years for the most snow days is still the 3 years I taught at that school because I hated it. I mean, it was such a hard job. I needed time off. I would manifest snow days, but only in the winter. It's not
Yeah,
like I was
yeah,
trying to do
yeah.
it in May, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
would purposely stack my schedule. I was the theater teacher, so I was busy AF. I would do
Mm.
our performances in the winter months so that I could manifest the snow days, so that I could have the breaks I needed. So that's the kind of long-term thinking with our magic that really elevates a practice with weather.
I love that. That's great. Can you describe the role of the egregore in our understanding of land-based spirituality and the significance of reaching below it?
Oh yeah. So if you live in a city, you are going to have a harder time connecting to land spirits. I'm not going to lie. You will. But you'll be benching 200. So by the time you go to, Stonehenge, somewhere where the land spirits are
Mm.
like in your face, you will be connected before you even park the car.
Hmm.
So it is worth learning this practice I'm about to describe. And it's in the book in more depth. But the egregore, I always go back to, I'm going to do the super Greek thing here. It's from the Greek word egregoros. Egregoros means wakeful energy. So an egregore is the most alive energy in a given place. So if we talk about New Orleans has a vibe, right? It feels
Uh-huh.
like New Orleans. You can't manifest what New Orleans is like in New York City. New York City has its own egregore. And that egregore, it's mostly human. It is human. It's
Uh-huh.
the effect of the living people in that moment. It's the effect of the spirits left behind, which are mostly residual, but if a protest happened on that street, for example, things like that. Um, and it's also the energy of the moment. So the political moment, the social moment, it's loud, it's big, it's hard to reach beneath. It's the first thing you'll feel when you start to connect to land spirits. And I write about this in the book. I notice egregores of humans tend to be more on like the purple to blue spectrum of energy. Like it's a violet
Hmm,
light for me.
hmm,
And then I have to reach beneath that, and that's when I can get to the greenish, browny, moss colored, you know.
mm,
I'm a very visual. Like when I'm doing this work, I kind of do get colors, and I'm synesthetic. I have synesthesia. So that's also partly why that might be. Um, but yeah, so reaching beneath that egregore means you have to know what it feels like. So if you live in your city and you low key hate it, it might be harder to do this. So one of the practices in the book is to make a land spirits altar to your city. You know, is there a certain candy made in your city? Is there a certain soda, beer? Get some bottle caps, put it on the altar. Get some wrappers, put them on the altar. Your sports team, get a baseball cap, put it on the altar. You know, do something to kind of connect to the spirit of your place in the most literal human way. And then once you know, you can identify this is what it feels like in New Orleans, then you can reach deeper. And when I say reach deeper, it's meditative, you know, it's closing your eyes and raising up the energy, reaching down to meet it, the energy of the land beneath that, and then raising it up through that egregore. And you'll know you've
mhm,
done that when honestly, you'll know you've connected to a land spirit anytime because you'll feel calm in a neutral way and present. Like the moment is the moment. You're not, you know, it's a meditative stillness, but it's also an awareness. You know, it kind of makes me think of like I think it's the same sensation. If this, I hope this doesn't sound assumptive, it might, but I think it's probably the same sensation that the shamans of Scandinavia would write about of like going out, being in complete stillness with land
mm,
until
mhm,
you know, the bears and the deer would actually approach them and not even really notice they're there. You do kind of hit that state. So in a city, though, to get there, you do have to reach beneath this kind of amorphous cloud of human to get there. So knowing it's there, knowing what it feels like is the first step to reaching beneath it because then you know what it doesn't feel like once you get past it.
yeah, that's super interesting. Do you think the land spirits co-creates with the human spirits in some
Mm.
sort of way to give them a foothold in that human world?
I think this will answer your question. If not, clarify it and ask again. But
Yeah.
what I'm thinking to say on this is yes, because land spirits want us here. Like, I think
Mm,
that's the first step if you wanna work with land spirits is removing the burden of fault from your heart that
mm,
you are the reason the land is suffering. Because, yes,
mhm,
maybe you do buy something on Amazon every so often. Maybe you do get palm oil ingredients, food, and that kills orangutans. But you are not pouring billions of gallons of oil into the sea and laughing about it with your billionaire friends. You are not you know what I mean? Like, you are not at fault. You are not at fault. Yes, you might be making decisions in a system that is at fault, that makes, does a little bit, a tiny, tiny bit of damage. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be conscientious like we are. We should be. You know, if you can get something without palm oil in it, good. If you can not spray Roundup on your land, my goddess, please don't spray Roundup. Um, but do not blame yourself for the way the earth is suffering because of human actions. It's not productive. It's not what the land actually wants from us. The land really wants us to know that we belong because it knows that. So if we're not meeting it there at that place of connection, of acceptance that this is our planet, it's the only one we're ever going to have, we can't even survive on the top of Mount Everest, much less another planet. We can't even survive on every part of this planet. So, knowing what we have, having gratitude for that, knowing the land wants us here is step one. And then we can actually achieve this oneness that many people, choose to seek out. So the land is co-creating with us in the sense that it is us. You know, we're carbon, we're water. End of story. Land is carbon, is water. We're stardust, we're all these, we can get as woo as we want with it, but we are the land and the land is us. And as soon as we acknowledge that and accept that, we can start to move past the grief we feel for earth and land and actually be into open connection with it. And so it'll help us move that grief. In fact, you might find yourself, if you go out there to the land, you might have some grief and it'll flow out because what's land trying to do? Ground us, neutralize us. If there's some water boiling over, it has to boil over. Let the tears out. But then you'll come to that calm and center and you can ask the land, are you sad about that bridge project that took out a forest on that side? as weird as it sounds, it really won't be because it knows that forest will be back in land time in no time.
Hmm.
We're the ones at risk of disappearing forever. And yes, we're going to lose species. Yes, we're going to lose important flowers and insects and plants and all kinds of things if we don't stop. And we need to stop. I definitely am not saying, oh, la di da, like definitely not. But I think we hear enough of that. And so I just want to give hope
Hmm.
as well. The land spirits aren't as annoyed by the little in the moment changes humans make to the environment. They're much more annoyed that we think it's hopeless. Like, what they really want from us is to just be in connection and to be listening, and when they do guide us to something we can do help we can make a difference on, to actually just do it. And there are so many things we can make a difference in the earth for, and that's that reciprocity. It might not sound overly magical, but bringing a trash bag, like a little Walmart bag or whatever, those little plastic bags you get for free in the US, if you bring one of those with you everywhere you go and you just pick up the litter you see and put it in there and then throw that away when you get home, that's been a huge act of service to the land. And that's where it starts. It's very small things. If you see your neighbor spraying Roundup on the sidewalk, go out there and remind and just tell them white vinegar is much cheaper,
Yeah.
because they might not give a shit about the earth. But if you say it's much cheaper, they might like it.
Amen. Yeah. I love that. That's great. Um, when you're looking at this kind of wider land spirit ecology, I'm wondering what you see as the significance of, or the role of what in Ireland or Scotland they'd say are like a is she. Other people would say fairies, but that can be a broad term too. But if you're specifically talking about kind of that iteration of a fairy, how does that fit into this land spirit ecology for you?
I think another good analogy is the nymphs. So
Okay.
they're very present. They're very much real. Um, they are kind of the part of the land spirits that is more playful, is more
Mm,
alive on the surface, because the land spirit is like it's almost. This is still a working concept for me. I'm never going to be sold on anything because the land sometimes changes how it explores itself with us.
yeah.
Nothing is static, right? Everything's dynamic. But where I'm at right now with dragons, I think a lot of times what people think they feel are dragons are actually land spirits, particularly in Greece. Like there's the famous Corinthian cave where
Mm,
the Pythia, the python, is who
yeah.
gave her wisdom. Apollo, quote unquote, slew the python and then created the temple. Before he slew the python, who was the python? It was the land
Hmm.
spirit. And that was what the Pythia listened to. And it still was, even when he, quote unquote, slew it. So that you go to that cave, you feel the Corinthian dragon. You feel it in there. So I think that's a lot of the land spirits we feel are dragons, or the other way around, a lot of the dragons we feel are actually land spirits. So what are the Fae? They're the parts of the dragon that comes out to play. And
Sure.
again, these land spirits contain multitudes we'll never necessarily understand the physics of or the ecology of. So how and why there's so many or not so many. Like I've been to some places where you see dozens of little spirits in your third eye. I've been to other
Hmm.
places where you see three or four, Fae spirits in your third eye. Um, and then I've been to places where the land spirit is the main thing. But those are much rarer. Usually it's these little Fae-like beings that come up and about. So with that, essentially they're the spirits of place. And so like a nymph, for example, like in Greek, we have piei, which are the nymphs of the springs, sacred springs, which are
Hmm.
different from the naiads, which are the springs of rivers, which are different from the nereids, which are the nymphs of sea, the ocean. And then we have Oreads, which are the nymphs of mountaintops. They're all very different. And then Dryad actually is the nymph of the oak tree,
Mm,
not specifically all trees like we use it in English. We have a Dryad for every type of tree. So if you go on Wikipedia and look up nymphs, there's literally you can press see more like 3 times. It's insane.
oh my
So
God.
so that's how specific like it could be. Greek is a very specific language. Um, like English, I think we sometimes lose our ability to explain what we mean because we only have one word for it. Whereas like in Greek, we have like 15 words for love and power even. Like there's different words if it's active or passive. There's a different word if it's internal or external. Um, so it's sometimes hard to put into English like how these things actually express. But so yeah, these fairies, that's what they are. And they're very childlike and they're very they're just pure. I mean, they're pure in the sense of they are what they are. Um, so in Greece, another example, I was in Crete last June with my friend, and she's very magically inclined. And we were out at this cliff that she loves. It's super, super windy. Like so windy that you feel like you could get pushed off of it. It's very, very windy. So as you go on this like path along it, you stay a little off away from the edge, but you're still kind of at the edge. And there's these little red jasper stones. Um, and, we were picking them up. We just kind of felt like we were supposed to. And then all of a sudden we come to this very clear altar to this place that I think organically came up. I don't think anyone, I think it's just something, hikers or whatever to find it and put them there. So there's a whole like bowl in this rock created naturally by rain that was filled with these red stones, clearly put there either by other people or maybe the Fae themselves, I don't know. But we knew we were supposed to put our stones we collected in this little thing. So as soon as
Hmm.
we drop them in, we feel the Fae come out. And they're like,
Hmm.
"Yay, you're here. Oh my gosh, come play with us." And they're trying to convince us to play their game with them, not maliciously at all. They're thrilled we're there to jump off the cliff. They were jumping off the cliff, spinning in the air, and coming back on land. We can't do that. We're in corporeal form. So these Fae were like, "You're missing out. It's so much fun." And we're like, "We literally can't. Thank you. We'll stay here. Have fun." Like I brought my drum. So we started drumming with them and we had a really nice time, but we could not say yes to their game. If I was a 3-year-old, I might not know that, right? I might jump
Hmm.
off that cliff with them.
Hmm.
So I think that's where people get this idea that fairies are scary. Now, they're also scary if you're an asshole. Like if you hurt them, if you do bad things to the earth consistently and knowingly, then yeah, then you're pissing them off. Like a lot of the fairy stories from Ireland are warnings. They're telling you what not to do. Those characters mess up on purpose for you to know now not to do that ever again. Um, but these other ways, like I do think that's how fairies can come across as dangerous or malicious, is because they're just so simple and they don't really think. They're not a deity, they're not going to have necessarily have your best interest at heart because they're just fun and playful and you know, in the land having a good time, and they just want you to experience that too. I was at a nymph, I was at a spring of Aphrodite, and the water nymphs there, as I was drumming, maybe they were already doing this before, but I didn't notice it until after I was mid drum. And I saw like little vortexes starting at different points, and they were all going in different directions. I had brought roses for offerings, and I'd already offered some, but I still had some petals left. So I was dropping the petals at these different points and watching them go in crazy directions. Like, I don't know how water could flow in that many directions. Like, it was insane. And I was there. I was with my friend Joanna Farrar of Coffee and Divination podcast. This was last May. And I was there. We were there for like 7 hours. We were so hungry. The Fae did not want us to leave, and we'd eaten all our snacks. The sun was starting to go down. I was like, she's like, "I still don't want to go." I was like, "Me either." But I was like, "I think we really have to go." Like, I think we felt like we wanted to just fall into the water and be done. Like it, and not because
Hmm.
we were unhappy. We were so happy. It was pure bliss. So fairies, I think I like to think of them as perilous, not
Hmm.
dangerous, but perilous. And I use that in Tolkien's definition. When they're entering Lothlorien, Boromir says, "I don't want to go in there. I've heard that these elves are perilous, are
Hmm.
dangerous." And Aragorn says, "Say not dangerous, but instead say perilous, because you do not emerge from this forest unchanged." And that's
Hmm.
the reality of the Fae, is they will change you if you let them. And you have to be aware of your control in that change. And that's where I think they are a bit of an advanced magic, because you have to know thyself, know to say
Hmm.
thon, like Apollo says, and you have to know your stuff. You have to know your magic a bit to know how to set boundaries with spirits and yeah, to just be discerning with spirits to work well with the Fae.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. That last bit there about the perilous nature of fairy brings up something I've often associated them with, which is being somewhat related to a psychedelic experience for a human, which can be really positive and transformative, or it can be harrowing and terrifying and even like damaging. It's kind of
Yeah.
interesting, like the way you put that. Yeah. I like that.
And I've had a few psychedelic experiences. Um, like I've done mushrooms, I think 3 times or 4 times. One time was a dud. That's why I think it was 3
Mm.
times. Because you know how it was, like, 10 years ago, if you wanted mushrooms, it was like some guy knew, and you never knew if they were gonna work or not or just make you
From a
sick or do
closet.
nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one time they did nothing, but I had a couple good experiences, and, that was actually something I noticed about psychedelics is there's a cliff's edge, and in a
Mm.
psychedelic experience, you have to go over the cliff's edge.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of interesting too, because with the Fae in our physical form, we can't go over the cliff's edge, but in psychedelic, we can. In trance, we can. In a path working, we can, and we should. So the Fae introduce us. Maybe that's a better way to say it. The Fae introduce us to the cliff's edge, and
Yeah.
then it's up to us to go over that on within ourselves.
I love it. Super well said. So, obviously, with Seeking Numina, this kind of wider project, you do not only your podcast, but also taking people on tours, beyond just like this inherent Numina in all things, which I think we're talking about to some degree, you do have these particularly like, sacred sites. I
Yeah.
don't know. Can you just describe a little bit about what you think is going on in these places that makes them slightly different from 30 feet away, a mile away? What is happening? What's congealing? What are people bringing to it?
What makes a sacred site, right? I'm going to start with what I assume everyone's thinking I'm going to say, which is ley lines. So ley lines were put
Mhm.
together in like the 20s by I think Watkins was his name. Um, and it was kind of this like scientific answer to this question. Um, I don't necessarily I address them in the book because you have to. People want to hear about them. But I don't necessarily think it's that straightforward. I think they're moving. I don't think they're literally like an astrocartography situation of this is where they
Mm.
are. I think it's the dragons that we feel. I think it's these
Hmm.
earth spirits, like the land spirits. Um, and I think they do like shift and change, not in the sense that like they move location, but like a snake, they undulate.
Huh.
They're active. They're not like a line that's drawn in the sand. It's not a passive existence. Um, so that's what I think we're feeling is the hot spots of the land spirits. And there's gonna also be like as above, so below. We will see things that tell us that this is a sacred place. So like Mount Shasta, it is something
Mhm.
so visibly sacred. Devil's Tower, visibly sacred. The Crickian Cave, visibly sacred. I mean, you walk into that and you can picture dragon. It's huge. I don't even know how many 30, 40, 50-foot ceiling. Like you can picture a family of dragons nesting in there. So there's gonna be signs. And then also wells, the water, literally the water of life coming up out of something is going to be a sacred place. I've thought about this too. Maybe it's as simple as we're feeling the karst rivers under the water, under the ground, going through the stone.
Mhm.
Maybe that is all we're feeling. I do think it's more than that though. I think the water holds the memory of that and can communicate to us more clearly. Like I think, as much as I say air makes sense as the first direction, water can be the best spiritual tool to start with. Like if you were gonna have an altar with nothing on it but one thing, a bowl of water might be the best thing just because it holds memory. It's something you can use practically. You can anoint yourself with it. You can touch it. Um, so I think the water is at a lot of sacred places because it carries the memory of what's underneath the land spirit and brings it to us. Um, so that's the big like when I look at most sacred sites, like when I think of the guests I've had on Sacred Places podcast, it is mostly, water based or there's something to do with water in life. Also, it's refuge. If we think of our ancestors, they had to go where the water was. And that was the land giving them life, literally, in refuge. So I think it's a mix of those things. And then we create sacred spaces. We do it every time we set up an altar. We reaffirm it every time we light a candle. So creating a sacred place is 100% possible as well. I've been to dozens of Hindu temples. They all are created by man. I mean, they're the most like I love Hindu temples. They're so extra. They're so
Hmm.
extra. Like I know my background looks very eclectica, but like I really am not that extra in my practice. Like I just have a
Hmm.
lot. These are all little shrines to different things. That's why they're so detailed. There she is. There's Lakshmi and Ganesha right in front of
Oh,
her.
yeah.
That's my prosperity working altar.
Ah, I
Um,
love it.
so yeah, there's something to creating your own sacred space. Definitely over here, there's nothing I'm on at this exact house that I'm in that is, a given sacred space, but I've created it to be. And I do ritual up here with my coven. I have, it's definitely a sacred place. Um, so it's a mix of both. We can create them and we can also find them. And I will say this, everybody lives near one. You can,
Hmm.
other than the created ones, I guarantee you live near a water source, you live near an old tree. If you're in North America, particularly on the East Coast, go hunting for your sycamores. Sycamores were planted by the natives. They grow at water sources. For the native people, they were beacons. I mean, think of that white bark in the winter. They were beacons of safety and refuge. So, and I'm not suggesting appropriating native culture here, but knowing that they were planted for connection to that land, they're waiting for connection. So going to them, leaving an offering, add a land acknowledgement if it makes you feel more comfortable. Definitely, this is in the book as well. Oh, I do think this is kind of a side note, but I do think knowing the natives who lived on your land is quite important for North Americans. So if you don't do that research, like go find out who were your peoples, what language did they speak. Um, for all of my books, I do a lot of research at the Native American Museum down in DC. Again, because I have the privilege of living on this coast, but the Library of Congress online has an incredible plethora of resources. That's usually where I dip in. And then some tribes are still alive and moving. Our tribes from this area were the Lenape, the Susquehannock, and they died out or shifted all the way out towards Wisconsin in some cases, but mostly they assimilated into tribes through the Trail of Tears over in the Midwest. So there were some resources I found online from them, but mostly there's not much. So you might hit dead ends, but see what you can find. Just do your due diligence.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Yeah, interesting they were talking about being displaced and all that. I'm curious, I feel like you're very appropriate to answer this question, being somebody who's lived in so many different places and had so many different cultural experiences. I think a lot of people who might listen to this podcast have strong pull towards ancestral lands that maybe they don't get to visit very much, or maybe haven't, can't afford to, what have you. I'm just curious what advice you might have for them in terms of not ignoring where they are, wherever that might be. And how can where they are now, maybe even in some way, be in conversation with these ancestral lands that they can't go to, that kind of thing.
First things first, I really want to give a digital hug to everybody who feels disparate from their ancestral lands because I know what that's like. Like I do not feel safe to go to Egypt. I went once. I would like to go again soon, but the more work I do publicly, the less safe that becomes, and I'm very angry and sad about that. And I know what that is to feel apart from your identity. What I'll also say is diving too deep into what we can't have can really close us off to what we do have. And Americans monoculturist Americans, or maybe a better way to say this is Americans who've only ever lived in America, they can be very short sighted in thinking that because they're not on their ancestral lands, this land doesn't want to work with them. And that is so not true. And I think some of that comes from I'm not native, so I can't work with the land. It would be appropriation to work with the land. I don't even know Native American practices to tell you not to do them. I just don't do them. Don't even like you wouldn't know them. Most of us wouldn't even know them to appropriate them. Talking to the land is not appropriating anything. Your land is talking to you. Are you going to ignore them because you don't want to appropriate? It's like if a person of color came up to a white person and said good morning, and they said, "Oh, I don't want to appropriate your culture by saying hello to you back." Like you wouldn't ever think that way. So why do we think that way about land? Um, so that's the big thing here, and I think Americans feel like they can't belong here because of that. Like the consciously aware ones, the ones listening to this podcast, right? Um, they think like, "Oh, maybe I can't belong here because I should just leave. Oh, things are hard. We should just leave." You do belong here. You are here. And so you belong here. You are here, especially in this crazy moment in history that we're living through. You chose to incarnate, or you have incarnated, however you see that, for a reason now. So running from it, ignoring it is not gonna make you feel better. Wishing for what you don't have. Even if I will say this, even though I spent a lot of time in Greece, I speak Greek. I was not educated in Greece, and so I don't really fit in Greece the way I would if I had been. Like, there's idioms I don't know, for example. Um, there's cultural inside jokes I don't get. There's also lived experience, like the economic crash of 2011. That didn't affect us because we lived in the U.S. So I don't have a shared culture with them, and I am that culture, and I've consistently been in that culture. For an American who's never even been to Ireland and they're in their 30s trying to figure out how to emigrate there, I promise you, you're gonna feel infinitely more isolated over there than you do where
Hmm.
you are. And that is a harsh truth, but it's true. And so I think we need to recognize the beauty of the American identity a lot more, and that's going to help heal. Actually, at Sacred Space, I presented on with my friend Solomon Pakal. He's a first generation. This is ironic. He's a first generation immigrant to the U.S. He's a Native American. He's a Mayan priest. Um, the Mayans were not they didn't die out, by the way, everybody. They literally never died out. They are still alive. In fact, the Daykeepers are the biggest ordained sect of alternative religion in the world. So anyway, he's a Mayan. He's not a daykeeper, but he's a generational brujo. And so him and I presented on kind of our love of country for this country, because neither of us would be alive today if it weren't for this country. My grandmother was part of the caravan that was led by H.W. Bush in 1990 to free the people who when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, he enabled us all to travel. If my dad and her hadn't been in that, I wouldn't be alive today. Um, and on his side, I won't speak for him, but he's a military service member as well. And his journey here, same, he would not be alive today. So that is the case for a lot of people, a lot of important people, people that are loved in this world, in America, and have made the big changes in the world. Um, this is not a bad place. It's in a bad moment. And there are a lot of bad people, not to paint a wide brush. I don't necessarily believe in good and evil, but there are people making very bad decisions. That's very true. But exposure is hope, and hope is agency, hope is active. So when we listen to the land, and that is the answer to the moment we're in, is simply listening to the land. The land knows what's what. So even if you're like, all I'm doing is replacing Roundup with white vinegar, how am I helping? The way it trickles out, the way it'll trickle out in every conversation. You're in the checkout line, you have your huge 2 gallons of white vinegar. The guy behind you says, "What's that for?" "Oh, I'm replacing Roundup." "Wait, you can do that?" "Yeah, it's cheaper." Whoa, now he goes and does it. Now he tells his uncle. It is so important. I think the internet makes us think that if we can't be the big change, we can't be the change. And it's such a cliche, but it is. We have to be the change we want to see. We just have to. I mean, that little bird can make a difference. Why could we not? We look at ecosystems, and it's the tiniest little thing that holds it all up.
Very well said. Beautiful. Um, yeah. Well, I'm about to take us into a Patreon segment here, but before you do that, can you give all your plugs to everybody? Where should people find you and all the stuff you're
Yeah.
doing?
ElyseWells.com. That's where it's got it all. The podcasts are there. I also do pilgrimages to Greece. On the mainland of Greece is where I work. And I take you to oracle sites, mostly around Delphi. People think of Delphi because it was redone by Hadrian. So it looks very nice. But there were 13 other oracle sites in that area, and many of them are unexcavated and abandoned. So we get to go there and do ritual at them. And they're super powerful. There's no tourist egregore. So we go there. We go to a lot of places. This sacred spring I talked about. This year I'll be taking people there for the first time. Um, so definitely join me in Greece if you're called to this work. I also teach the Path of the Sacred Wild every summer, and it's open to all genders. I get that question a lot because I'm a priestess, but that's just because that's my gender. It's open to all genders. The Earth Temple Arts were open to all genders. At Dodoni, the oldest oracle site in Greece, the priests and priestesses slept together beneath the sacred oak. So I really believe this in an agender approach to land work. So join me in the path of the sacred wild if you are interested in this work. And yeah, Sacred Wild is available everywhere books are sold. It's sold by Llewellyn. If you go through their website, um, that's always good. Or if you ask your library to get it in, they'll usually get more than one copy. So that's super helpful for authors as well. Or your local bookstore. They tend to do the same. So
Hell yeah. Well, Elise, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
yeah, thanks for having me.
Hell yeah. Okay, now we're in the green room, separate podcast. I have a few other questions to dive into. Um, I was interested in some of the courses you offer on your website. One of them that you offer is witch codes, so that was kind of cool. Two questions about it. One is, what do you think enforces the witch codes? And additionally, I'm curious if you think that they might have something to do with what we might call right relation, or you were calling reciprocity earlier. And if you think this animistic right relation terminology might be an update for the Wiccan threefold law for witches.
It's funny you ask about witch codes because I think I was told by my guides that last year will be the last year I teach that course, but not because I won't be teaching the witch codes, but because I think when people think witch, they think, how can I help myself?